This morning's reading is from the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verses 1 through 11. Then the daughters of Zelophehad came forward. Zelophehad was son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, a member of the Manassite clans. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers." Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they are saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. You shall also say to the Israelites, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and ordinance, as the Lord commanded Moses." The next hymn is number 531 in the New Century Hymnal.
Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Standing on a cable here. Sorry, give me a second. Help. Two men entered the Wesleyan chapel to the right. They heard that there was a gathering to listen to another lecture. Both were members of this progressive Methodist congregation. They were proud to be part of a movement that denounced slavery. Now, this convention was all about equal rights, they heard. The convention had already started, and the two men lowered their hats and greeted some people in the entry and then in the pews, while a handful of women stood at the front. One of the two men began to listen. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of these United States. The two men look at each other while one utters, "That's ludicrous." Friends, there are situations in our lives where we are bound to conformity of society, to decisions being made while our own voices are not being heard. In the just narrated situation, I wonder who had tried to place it in history. We find ourselves in 1848 in the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton reads the Declaration of Sentiments. This is hardly a single instance. People faced similar situations that the woman felt at that time, about the right to get married, for example, or the right to get children, or have children, or adopt children. All those who work 3 part-time jobs today, for instance, I am thinking of, they must be in a similar situation because they need to be able to survive with their family, but they have no health care benefits or just minimal social security. And I'm wondering, how loud must the voices inside them be that they speak up? How loud do they need to be that someone else listens to them? The daughters of Zelophehad, these 5 brave women, are facing the consequences of a patriarchal system that governed society. They were the last heirs of the house of Manasseh, one of the 12 houses, the 12 sons of Jacob, who would inherit the promised land in the Levant, the bridge between Africa and Asia. Their father died on the journey from Egypt, leaving no male heir. But he had 5 daughters, those 5 brave women. And those 5 daughters would not receive an inch of land on which they could dwell in the land they were about to enter. At first, their inner voices may have been quiet, but the closer they came to the destination, the land of milk and honey, their inner voices feel secure, to give their children a place to live, grew. Assertive, passionate, and self-determined as they were, they stood at the beginning of the tent of meeting, the house of worship filled with men, and they raised their voices. They wanted to be heard. Their house of Manasseh had a right to receive a portion of God's inheritance, even though they had no male heirs. Perhaps there was a discussion. Perhaps there was confusion among the men. Perhaps there was even anger that they spoke up. But these men in the house of worship listened. They did not come to preoccupied conclusions. Instead, they heard the woman out and used their wisdom to discern, as unusual the situation and the request may have been, they discerned. Oh, I wish I could just put that here, but then you can't see me anymore. Maybe some people don't want to see me anyway. So, the situation in Seneca Falls must have been uncomfortable for many. And certainly, many walked out the chapel. But many, in fact, as much as 300 people, listened to the complaints, the disagreement. And they listened to the disappointment that the woman just shared and the suffrage women had to go through at the time because they were not recognized the way men were. All men and women are created equal, Stanton said in that statement. In the end, over 90 signatures confirmed the declaration. And that day was just the first essential step for women's rights. Less than 20 years later, Stanton became the first woman to run for the U.S. House of Representatives without being able to vote in an election. She received 24 votes out of 30,000, but hey, that's a start. 72 years later, or from our perspective, 175 years ago, in 1920, Congress ratified the 19th Amendment. These women made the unconventional conventional because they listened, they understood that they had to speak up. And it did not happen from one day to another, but one man, a handful of men, then 10 men, then 20, maybe then 50 listened and they understood. Friends, we can listen because God listens. The people in the tent of meeting decided that Moses needs to ask God. They decided they needed to go into a discernment process with God. And God listened. And God discerned. I wonder how loud God's voice must have been for them, inside them, those women. I wonder how God's voice, how loud it must have been for those men who listened. And I wonder how long it took for them not just to listen, but to understand. Ultimately, they agreed with the unconventional request of the daughters of Zelophehad. If anything, this remarkable passage and the requests by those bold women are an affirmation of discernment with God. In an unusual situation, pause can be helpful to realign values. The daughters of Zelophehad initiated a moment of reflection and debate that caused a discernment together with God. A conversation with God becomes then the determining factor for deciding whether the house of Manasseh would receive a designated area of land. The act of speaking up is courageous. Indeed, it is in the situation of the daughters as much as for Miss Stanton in Seneca Falls or Henry Gerber in Chicago. It is also courageous to overboard the given status quo of societal status by those making those decisions. Such courage requires determination and faith. But how do we discern the moves that lead us to speak up? How much must we see until we decide to make a decision to speak and follow the voice that is inside us or even outside us? How loud must that voice have been inside the daughters? How loud must have the voice been inside Moses, inside Miss Stanton? How do you hear God calling you to do the right thing? And how long does it take you to get there? When I received the message that someone needed my pastoral experience, combined with my academic knowledge in interfaith relations to build an interfaith house of worship, I knew it was a loud voice that I tried to downplay for many weeks. How loud must God's voice be until we hear it and say, okay, I hear we have God's work to do. I'm sorry, that is very German. I hear we have to do God's work. Amen.